If you've experienced something unbelievably weird and unexplainable that left you feeling isolated and afraid, the Paranormal PTSD Recovery Podcast is for you. Each week, we go from haunting to healing by focusing on one of our three core focal points: personal stories, healing tips, and understanding the unknown. We help you to know that you're not crazy, you're not alone, and you can heal. Now here's your hostess, Laura Giles. If you are new to paranormal experiences, and if you're in mental health, you're going to need to know the difference between a genuine paranormal or supernatural experience and a mental health crisis or break. This is what I'm talking about today because I'm sure that the first thing that a lot of experiencers ask is, am I dreaming and am I crazy? For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, I'm Laura Giles, your host and a trauma therapist for over 20 years. And I've worked in the courts, prison, a psychiatric hospital, community mental health, and in private practice. So I don't say I've seen it all because there's always that person who comes in with something new, but I've seen a lot. And since the first days of working in the field, there are always people with paranormal experiences and always people with delusions, delirium, and hallucinations. There can be a lot of overlap. So how do you tell if you're making stuff up or having a psychotic break or have had a genuine paranormal or supernatural experience? Both can lead to euphoria. Both can lead to paranormal PTSD. Both can be really confusing. So it's important to tease that out. So let's talk about delusions first. Delusions are strong beliefs that the person experiencing insists that they're real, but there's no evidence that this is true. Some common examples of this are things like the CIA is spying on me, that other people can hear my thoughts, or that I can hear people's thoughts, thinking that a teddy bear is controlling my thoughts, or that something like an eclipse is a sign that I'm the chosen one. Typically, we don't see any evidence that those things are real. It just happens in a person's mind. So delusions can have no basis in reality or some basis in reality. If it has some basis in reality, it's harder to shake. But in either case, logic does very little to dislodge the belief. I had a client once who was paranoid. She had a belief that someone was following her, spying on her, and reporting her every move to the police. She was afraid of going out because she feared that they were going to arrest her. So when I asked her what she did to be arrested, she said nothing. That didn't make her feel any safer. It didn't matter that there was no reason for the police to pick her up. She was still scared to death about it. So that's an example of delusions. And many times delusions don't really impact the person's life too much. But because this one made it difficult for her to leave the house, her whole life was impaired. Sometimes the person with delusions are protective about it and don't talk about it. Sometimes they talk openly about it. Typically, the delusion is a central part of the person's life. So if someone thinks that they're having a secret love affair with a celebrity whom they've never met, they're preoccupied with it. It's not just a pressing thought. Delusional disorder is pretty rare. And this could be because someone with delusions can be pretty normal and functional otherwise. They could go to work every day, pay the bills, dress like the average person, carry on a relationship. They just might think that they have a space wife that they visit every night. So they don't report it, you don't know about it. So it could be way more common than we think. And, maybe they do have a space wife. Lots of people are having paranormal and supernatural experiences that the rest of us don't have. We may not have the technology to validate this. And since this is not a part of our culturally accepted ways of thinking, we call it delusional. To qualify for the diagnosis of delusional disorder, the delusion has to be present for more than a month. The person can never have been diagnosed with schizophrenia. The person's behavior isn't bizarre, so the strange belief isn't getting in the way of their day-to-day life. And if they've had manic or depressive episodes, they have been shorter than the length of the delusion. If all that's true and the delusions can't be explained by substances or an illness or another mental disorder, that's what we call delusional. So by these rules and definitions, a mental health professional would be perfectly reasonable to label someone who says that they've been abducted by aliens as being delusional and mentally ill. Find that appalling, but there we are. And this is why so many people don't talk about their experiences. The possibility of being labeled crazy and put on medication could be real as long as we don't consider the possibility that paranormal and supernatural stories are real. The more we talk about them, the more socially acceptable it becomes to believe in them, and then the stigma and labels go away. Now let's look at delirium. When someone tells an outlandish story, the listener might say, "You're delirious." But that's not usually the case with someone who has a paranormal experience, because delirium is when your mind goes elsewhere. You're not here or barely here. So your body's here, but you can't focus or sustain attention. It comes on quickly, like days or hours, versus gradually with Alzheimer's dementia, and it fluctuates in intensity throughout the day. The delirium is considered a medical event. There is evidence that something induced it, like alcohol or the exposure to some toxin. So delirium is a condition where you're mentally out of it and not in touch with reality, but this isn't the way that experiencers of paranormal or supernatural events typically present, so I think we can rule this one out. Now, hallucinations are probably blamed for most paranormal or supernatural events. A hallucination is a sensory experience that someone perceives that others don't. In other words, I see, hear, taste, touch, or smell something that you don't. If it happens within your mind, it's called imagination. If it happens outside your mind, it's called a hallucination. So either way, it's considered to be not real unless it's verifiable by someone else. And I think that's crazy. In many abduction stories, the experiencer tells of some witnesses being turned off. What I mean is, I could be in bed next to my partner and I'm having a 20-minute encounter with aliens, but my partner is completely unaware of it. Or let's say I'm a teenager having a sleepover with 3 friends. We're all playing a game and 2 of them get turned off while me and 1 friend are abducted. The scene resumes when we get back, and the 2 who were not taken have no idea that any time has passed or that anything's happened. So the phenomenon doesn't happen to everyone who's present. It only happens to the person or people who are selected. It's pretty wild, huh? That's a joint hallucination, I guess. So I've heard lots of people talk about smelling cigar smoke and feeling like it's the presence of their grandfather who smoked cigars, or someone smelling roses or lily of the valley and assuming that it's the perfume smell from the one that their grandmother used to wear. Maybe other people can smell it and maybe they can't. I was once doing a ritual on ground that was formerly inhabited by Native Americans, and I was drumming, but some of us could hear more than one drum. I cleansed the area with sage at the start of the ritual, but about halfway through it, it smelled like it was burning again, and many people smelled that too. But everyone didn't, so I don't think that having third-party verification can absolutely rule in or rule out whether something is real. Perception's a tricky thing, especially when you consider that many experiencers talk about telepathically communicating with extraterrestrials. Only the intended receiver can hear the communication. Does it mean it isn't real or didn't happen? That's why a lot of people question their sanity when they've had a paranormal experience. We rely on consensus and what's typical and expected to tell us what's possible or probable. But when dealing with the paranormal, the normal rules of our society don't apply. They can materialize, dematerialize, leave marks on our bodies, heal us, talk to us, implant thoughts and dreams, and do things that humans can't do. So we say it's real or not real or possible, but it is. So let's look at schizophrenia, because this might help to clear some of this up, because right now it's like maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm not. So schizophrenia gets a really bad rap. It's sensationalized in the media. So before I go into the criteria to help you to understand whether someone has it or not, let's talk about some misconceptions. So a lot of people ask me if they or someone that they know had schizophrenia. And the first thing I ask is, how old were they when the symptoms started? This usually takes care of most of the inquiries. The onset of schizophrenia is between 16 and 30, with most males presenting with signs in their early 20s and most females in their late 20s. So if you're a young child or an older person, you probably don't have schizophrenia. Not to say that it's impossible if you're young or old, but it's not probable. I know that gives a lot of people comfort. Another thing to note is that schizophrenia doesn't have to be a lifelong thing that gets progressively worse. There are different types of schizophrenia, and about 50% of people end up completely cured. I grew up thinking that this was a lifelong thing. All the images in movies showed people in psych wards who were heavily medicated and out of it, but that's not necessarily the future for someone with schizophrenia. Those people have catatonic schizophrenia, and I think they highlight that in movies because it's sensational. That's not what it looks like most of the time. Just 22% of people have a single episode and no further issues. I think that's pretty hopeful. Only 35% of people get increasingly worse over time. So there's hope that even if this is you, it doesn't have to be forever or horrible. Another thing that's not true, but commonly believed, is that people with schizophrenia are violent. You're more likely to be the victim of a crime if you have schizophrenia than to be the perpetrator. And people with schizophrenia are delusional, but not typically dangerous. Another thing I used to think about schizophrenia, but I'm not sure if this is a thing anymore, is that schizophrenia is the same thing as split personality, and it's not. Now that I'm in mental health, I don't even know how the two became associated. It really makes no sense at all because they're completely different things. Maybe it's because they both hear voices, but the schizophrenic hears voices outside. The person with dissociative identity disorder hears voices inside. And so do lots of other people who have no mental illness. So if you have a running dialogue in your head, you probably know that because you hear that voice, and that's normal. A lot of people don't know that, and they keep it quiet because they think that it means that they're crazy, and you're not. And this also might be a surprise, but at least some of the people who hear voices outside of their heads know or suspect that the voices are not real and are not heard by others. When I was working as a case manager, I was accompanying a client to a doctor's appointment. We're sitting in the private patient room when a voice came over the loudspeaker saying something like, "Nurse to room 3, please." And she looked over at me and she says, "Did you hear that?" And I told her yes, and we both laughed. So they know that some of the things that they perceive are not perceived by others. Now, most people don't think about this, but if you did, you'd probably say that makes sense. But having a mental illness shortens your life. Schizophrenia shaves 15 years off your life expectancy. Yikes, right? And it's worse for men. So this is no joke. So let's talk about the symptoms. We talked about delusions, and that's one of the symptoms of schizophrenia. So is hallucinations. So if you have both of those for more than a month, and they need to be persistent, you might have schizophrenia. You also need to have disorganized speech. So you're not really communicating clearly for some reason. Some examples may be that you're thinking of X, but your words come out Y. Maybe your speech tempo is a little weird. Mine's definitely idiosyncratic. So is Jeff Goldblum and Christopher Walken. So there is some range of normal there. And some examples of disorganized speech are strange word choices, incorrect word choice, creating new words, talking too fast, losing track of what you're saying, speaking too slowly, randomly jumping from topic to topic. And sometimes this is like, I know what I'm saying and where I'm going, but the other person can't keep up because there's just a whole lot of ideas. And repetition of sounds or words like baby talk. Basically, anything that doesn't follow the standard socially acceptable way of processing words could be considered disorganized speech. I think most of us do at least one of these things that might qualify. And this is especially true if someone has anxiety or ADD. So look at the big picture. Schizophrenia is a brain disease, and it will show up in more than one area if you have it. So I know a lot of people are sitting there thinking, oh my God, this is me. Look at the big picture. Another symptom is disorganized behavior or catatonia. And these are the symptoms that tend to give someone away who has schizophrenia because they're visible. These are things like swatting the air when no one can see what you're swatting at. Socially inappropriate behavior is another one. Childlike actions like crawling, singing, or laughing when the social atmosphere isn't supporting that is another one. So responding externally to internal stimulus, like arguing with yourself, smiling for no reason, laughing for no reason, like you just heard the best joke and there's no one else here, no one heard it. So again, you have to look at the big picture. I certainly have laughed out loud at my private thoughts that no one else could hear, but I've never been preoccupied with that, and it's short-lived. These are pervasive ways of being for someone with schizophrenia, like the outside world is an afterthought. Another symptom of schizophrenia is diminished emotional response, so kind of flatness. Someone with a flat voice or a flat affect could have schizophrenia. They're definitely not neurotypical. So social isolation is the norm for people with schizophrenia. But it's more than just this. It has to show up in ways that impact their life. Someone with schizophrenia is not like someone with delusions. They probably can't function at a job or in a relationship while they're suffering with schizophrenia. And the issues aren't due to alcohol, drugs, or medical issues. Not to say that people with schizophrenia can't have substance issues as well. If that's what someone with schizophrenia looks like, you can rule that out as causes for paranormal or supernatural experiences, right? I haven't seen anyone become catatonic or lose their ability to communicate clearly after an experience. Have you? But there is a place where schizophrenia and paranormal experience connect. That is on a spiritual level. A lot of people with schizophrenia and paranormal experiences both have features of religious experiences. So if someone reports that they're experiencing harassment from demons, are they delusional or experiencing something real? If we look at this from a mental health perspective, we might say they're delusional. But if we look at it from a supernatural perspective, that could certainly be what's going on. And once they've been treated for that by like getting an exorcism, any related symptoms go away. We've all heard stories about this, right? I've definitely seen documentaries of spirit medicine where the person has some affliction and appears to be really sick or even dying. It could be mental or physical. And then the folk healer or witch doctor comes in, dances around, prays, applies a plant poultice or some sort of something, makes motions in the air, and then the person is fine. Our Western way of thinking says that that's the placebo effect. We can't reproduce it, we can't measure it, we can't explain how it happens, so it's not real, and yet it works. So what's real? Have you encountered the unexplainable? Do the shadows of the paranormal haunt your days and nights? You are not alone. Join our Paranormal PTSD recovery group, a safe haven where you can share your experiences, seek understanding, and begin to heal. Here, we believe your story. Together, we'll uncover the truth and find peace. Don't suffer in silence. Click on the link in the show notes to join and start healing today. This is a very tricky area. I met someone who was convinced that she was having a dark night of the soul. She's pretty tortured and was having a hard time keeping it together emotionally. She had thoughts of hurting people and of suicide, but she wanted to go all natural. And she called all sorts of healers, from naturopaths to energy workers, and they didn't really help. Eventually, she was involuntarily admitted to a psych hospital and put on drugs and then became stable again. I don't know what her diagnosis was, but after the medication, she didn't have the dark thoughts. She had no thoughts of harming anyone and could have normal emotional fluctuations without spiraling out of control. So it works both ways. Some spiritual issues can respond to medical interventions. Some things that look like medical issues might be normal or spiritual. I wouldn't say that mental illness doesn't exist or that all paranormal and spiritual events are spiritual warfare or delusions. Neither would I say that all paranormal events are exactly as they seem to be, particularly in the light of evidence that suggests that many are AI-driven fake stories and technology-created experiences designed for who knows what purpose. I don't think there's just one explanation for paranormal or supernatural experiences, and that's why I'm here exploring the possibilities. Some of them might be total misinformation or just wrong data. Some are assuredly exactly what they seem to be. We won't know unless we keep an open mind, examine the evidence, and ask questions. That's the way I approach everything, is to hear the person out, believe that they believe what they're saying is true. And if I'm their professional helper, I act as if it is true. I think everybody deserves dignity, and there's no honor in tripping someone out or stripping them of their beliefs because I just don't agree with them. This approach gives me time to get to know them, gather more information, and make decisions based on a foundation of experience for what's going on. Now, sometimes it's quite obvious that the person is not in touch with reality. In cases like that, it's pretty easy to say what's what, but most cases are not that, in my experience. You really need to take your time with this, especially if there are cultural influences. Culture matters. Most Haitians practice voodoo as a lifestyle. They live half in this world and half in the spirit world, and everything is sacred. If you're in Haiti and someone says that the gods are speaking to him, that's his reality. His neighbors will probably also agree because it's common there. So if you bring that same person to the USA, he's still the same and having a spiritual experience. You can't impose your worldview on other people. That's called culturally competent practice. Now, culture doesn't give you a pass if you're doing something to harm someone. If you believe that you have to be on alert for witches or wicked spirits and you think that a demon is telling you to do something harmful, you're still responsible for your actions. You don't get a pass. No one's going to bring a demon to court. That's not how it works. And if a demon tells you to crash your car into the medium, it's your body that will be devastated. So use some discernment. Culture is important, but we still live in a physical world with rules and laws. Another thing to consider is that if I start doing physical gyrations and speaking a language that nobody knows, that might sound like I've lost my marbles. But if I'm in a Pentecostal church, maybe not. Maybe I've got the Holy Ghost. So maybe it's normal in that context. But if it still scares me to death and is freaking me out because I have no control over it, it is possible to have a paranormal experience that induces PTSD, which is a mental disorder. In other words, the experience is real and it's also making me emotionally distraught. As far as helping someone, it doesn't matter if the story is true or not. The story has nothing to do with how I work with it at all. With the methods that I use, we bypass the story altogether. So getting stuck on the story can solidify the problem. It can make it the anger, the depression, the fear more hardwired. So do I want to talk about it all day? No. Now, if the person wants or needs to talk about it, if they need to share it to be heard, I'm all for that. There's a lot of healing that can be done by having someone witness your presence, your pain, your truth. Humans are emotional creatures. We need this connection. And as I've said in previous podcasts, connection is one of the things that both prevents and heals trauma. Trauma is not what happens to us. It's the feeling of isolation afterwards, that we have to carry this all alone, that creates trauma. So having someone witness your story helps to alleviate the burden of it. And that's a very useful reason to share it. And there's power in talking about a thing. Sometimes talking it out helps us to move through it and see other aspects of it or other possibilities. Maybe we see gifts in a horrible experience or horror in something that we thought was positive. Stories can teach us things. They can heal us. They can help us to release guilt and shame and feel human again after something shattering happens. That's the beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous. In my opinion, I don't think the magic lies in admitting that you're powerless and giving this up to a higher power. I don't think it lies in the 12 steps. I think the thing that keeps people going is that they have a non-judgmental place to go where other people will hear them and accept them as they are. They understand their struggles because they've had them too. I think that's it. And this is why we also have this in my private group. It's a place to talk about your experiences, your feelings, and your thoughts without judgment. It's a place to ask questions and be curious. I write all kinds of things in there. I don't have it all figured out. I'm willing to pose outlandish ideas, not because I think they're true necessarily, but to stimulate conversation and ponder what if. There's nothing to fear from a silly conversation, but when we shut down dialogue because we think we're being judged or don't like the topic, that's where things get dangerous. We may miss a breakthrough because we were too cowardly to say the thing aloud. And that's what happened in the movie Willow. Do you remember that? There's a competition to see if anyone will become the magician's apprentice. And the magician holds out his hand and asks the candidates which finger is the most powerful. I think that was the question. And Willow's impulse is to say his own, but he thinks to himself, that's stupid. So he follows everyone else's example and goes with the safe choice. He picks one of the sorcerer's fingers, which is the wrong answer. So nobody was chosen that year. So say the dumb thing. It might not be all that dumb after all. And if you're in the right company, they're not going to care anyway. And if you need a group to develop your curiosity about the paranormal or hear from a paranormal experience, join my group. The link's in the show notes. So did we solve the riddle of whether a person is having a mental health episode or a genuine paranormal experience? Probably not. You can see that in some cases it's complicated. You have to look at the big picture. If there's something that's endangering them or others, it's a mental health issue always. Get help. If nobody's being hurt, you just might leave it alone. One of the criteria for a lot of mental health disorders is that the symptom causes discomfort in some way. And a person has a right to live and believe as they want to. We call this healthy boundaries. Just because you find them a little wacky doesn't mean that there's something wrong. And the flip side of that is that if something bothers you, get help. It doesn't matter if it seems ridiculous or crazy. That's what mental health professionals are there for. So let's recap. Is this a mental illness episode or a paranormal experience? It may be impossible to say whether a paranormal experience actually happened the way that you think it did. So I think the more useful question is, what do I do about it? There's danger involved. That's a mental health issue, so treat it that way to be safe. If nobody's bothered by it, I say leave it alone. We can't say for sure whether it's a bona fide paranormal issue, but it's not a problem, so don't borrow trouble. And if it bothers you, get help. That's an effective way to deal with the problem that may have no answer. So thanks for tuning in. Are you subscribed? If not, be sure to do that, because next week I'm talking to Elizabeth Welch, a real life Ghostbuster, and she has some pretty wild personal experiences to share with you that you don't want to miss. So ciao, guys. Thanks for being here.